Dorian Blackwell liked to joke that he was half machine. It wasn't far from the truth, considering the scars that crisscrossed his body like a roadmap of survival. Years of planetary surveying had left their mark, but they'd also made him resilient, at least by human standards. Still, as he worked under the gleaming towers of Xylaris Prime, a hub of intergalactic trade and technology, even he felt a false sense of safety. The day started like any other. Dorian was assisting the crew of the Celestial Wayfarer with unloading specialized sensor arrays. These delicate instruments were central to a trade agreement between Earth and the Xylarian Federation, fostering trust and cooperation. The work was tedious, but Dorian didn't mind. "Keeps me moving," he said to his Xylarian friend Ian, whose pale green skin shimmered under the station's artificial lights. "You're reckless," Ian muttered, his voice carrying a nervous trill that Dorian had learned was typical for his species. "Reckless? Come on. It's just crates," Dorian said, smirking as he hefted another load. "Machines don't make mistakes," Ian replied, adjusting a diagnostic tool. "But humans." Dorian raised an eyebrow. "Thanks for the vote of confidence. What could go wrong?" Fate seemed to take his words as a challenge. Moments later, Dorian leaned against a control panel to catch his breath, unknowingly pressing a blinking red icon. A mechanical arm nearby activated, its sharp pincers swiveling with a high-pitched whir. "Dorian!" Ian's shout broke through the noise. Dorian turned just as the arm lashed out. A metallic spike struck him with brutal force, piercing his abdomen clean through before retracting. He staggered back, a look of stunned disbelief frozen on his face. Blood gushed from the wound, soaking his utility jumpsuit as he collapsed to the ground. Ian was at his side in seconds, his luminous eyes wide with panic. "Stay awake, Dorian," he cried, pressing his hands against the wound in a futile attempt to stem the bleeding. The alien crowd around them froze in shock. Xylarian biology lacked the human ability to compensate for such catastrophic injuries. To them, Dorian was as good as dead. Medical drones arrived within moments, scanning his pale, trembling form and relaying data to the Xylaris Central Infirmary. Xylaris Central Infirmary was a marvel of alien ingenuity, with bioluminescent panels that shifted colors based on patient conditions. When Dorian arrived, the entire ward was bathed in an ominous red light. Dr. Mulrich, a senior Xylarian surgeon with decades of experience, studied the holographic projection of Dorian's body. The damage was severe, a puncture wound through the liver, stomach, and intestines, accompanied by massive hemorrhaging. A human's redundant organ systems and clotting mechanisms were fascinating from a theoretical standpoint, but Mulrich had never treated one before. "His condition is critical," Mulrich said, his tone neutral despite the urgency. "Massive internal bleeding. Survival probability 2%. The medical team initiated emergency measures. An intravenous line delivered a saline-like fluid modified with trace elements compatible with human electrolytes. They used a scanning matrix to identify damaged tissue, but the irregular patterns of human organ placement added unexpected complications. "Begin hemostatic nanogul infusion," Mulrich ordered. "Focus on stabilizing the liver." A nurse hesitated. "But our protocols do not account for humans," Mulrich snapped. "We must improvise." As the team worked, Mulrich noticed something peculiar. Despite the extensive trauma, Dorian's body showed signs of adaptive response. The bleeding, while profuse, was already slowing, and his heart rate, though elevated, remained steady. Mulrich leaned closer, fascinated. "His body compensates. Intriguing." Then, to everyone's astonishment, Dorian groaned and opened his eyes. "Where am I?" he rasped, his voice weak but unmistakably alive. "You're in Xylaris Central Infirmary," Mulrich said, his three eyes narrowing. "Please remain still. You've sustained a fatal injury." Dorian glanced at the bloodied mess that was his torso and grimaced. "Fatal, huh? Guess I'm tougher than I look." Mulrich's expression tightened. "Your humor is misplaced. You should not be conscious." "I've had worse," Dorian muttered, though the sweat beading on his forehead betrayed the immense pain he was enduring. Mulrich Mulrick gestured to the monitoring devices. Your body is attempting to die, and yet you persist. This defies logic. Call it human stubbornness, Dorian replied. He propped himself up slightly, wincing. Just patch me up, Doc. I've got work to do. Mulrick stared, utterly baffled. He had treated species with regenerative capabilities far beyond human biology, yet none had exhibited this sheer will to live. You are in extraordinary pain, Mulrick said, more a statement than a question. Dorian's smile was strained but unwavering. Pain's temporary, Doc. Quitting lasts forever. Xylarian's central infirmary was alive with controlled chaos. Nurses, medical drones, and diagnostic projections moved in synchronized efficiency, yet a palpable sense of tension filled the air. The human patient in Bay 7 defied all logic and doctor. Mulrick's frustration grew with every passing moment. His liver is barely functional, Mulrick muttered, studying the data. The hemostatic nanogel slowed the bleeding, but the organ damage is beyond repair. His body compensates for the blood loss, but not for long. What about the synthetic organ scaffold, a nurse suggested. Mulrick shook his head. The metabolic differences between Xylarian and human biology make rejection likely. He glanced at the hovering holographic display. Prepare the molecular regenerator. We'll attempt localized repair of the liver tissue. The regenerator, a sleek device resembling a metallic pod, extended a series of precision lasers and biochemical infusers. It scanned Dorian's abdomen, isolating the damaged liver cells and beginning its meticulous work. Meanwhile, Dorian's semi-conscious state teetered between pain and stubborn awareness. His body screamed in protest, but his mind clung to the present. He opened his eyes again, catching sight of the strange device operating on him. "What's that thing doing?" he croaked. Mulrick stepped into view, his three luminous eyes locking onto Dorian. The molecular regenerator is repairing your liver tissue. It is a delicate process. Please remain still. Dorian managed a weak grin. Delicate, huh? Sounds fancy. Mulrick leaned closer, his frustration barely concealed. You should not be speaking. Your body is fine, Dorian interrupted, though his face was pale and glistening with sweat. Just a little liver work, right? I'll live. You are insufferable, Mulrick snapped. He gestured to a nurse to increase the sedative dosage, but Dorian's hand shot out, gripping the side of the biopallet. Don't sedate me, Dorian said firmly, his voice strained but resolute. I need to stay awake. Mulrick tilted his head, baffled. Why would you endure such unnecessary pain? Because pain means I'm alive, Dorian said. And as long as I'm alive, I fight. Mulrick hesitated, then relented with a frustrated sigh. Your resilience is infuriating. In the observation chamber, Mulrick convened an emergency meeting of Xylarian and interspecies medical specialists. Holographic projections displayed Dorian's vitals, alongside anatomical schematics provided by Earth's medical database. He should be dead, Mulrick began bluntly. The trauma to his liver, stomach, and intestinal tract is severe, yet he remains conscious and exhibits physiological compensation far beyond what we predicted. We must determine whether this is unique to him or common to his species. A Galcorian physician, whose crystalline skin refracted light into prismatic colors, tapped the holographic liver projection with a shimmering appendage. Humans have a peculiar regenerative capacity, she noted. Their liver can regrow up to 70% of its mass after damage. Could this explain his survival? Partially, Mulrick replied, but the rate of repair is extraordinary. The molecular regenerator reports cellular regrowth significantly faster than expected. A Xylothian surgeon, coiled in the corner like a living ribbon, hissed softly. Perhaps his willpower stimulates metabolic acceleration. Humans are known for their stubborn survival instincts. Mulrick frowned. You believe his mind influences his recovery? It is not unheard of, the Xylothian replied. Injured beings of many species who exhibit strong survival drive often fare better than those who resign themselves to death. Humans may excel at this. Mulrick glanced at the hologram of Dorian's face, frozen mid-grimace. Then we must push him further. 2 days later, Dorian was already testing the limits of his recovery. His wound had been partially closed with a biosuture matrix, and his liver showed signs of stabilization, but his body remained fragile. Ignoring the nurse's protests, he insisted on walking the infirmary corridors, his steps unsteady but determined. "Mr. Blackwell, you are not cleared for movement," a nurse chided, rushing to his side as he braced himself against a wall. Dorian waved her off, his face pale but his grin intact. "I'll rest when I'm dead." Despite his bravado, every step sent a wave of pain coursing through his abdomen. The biosuture matrix tightened in response, releasing localized analgesics, but it wasn't enough to mask the searing discomfort. Still, Dorian kept moving. He paused outside a patient's room, catching sight of a young Xylarian merchant named Aaron. The boy sat on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the prosthetic device where his left arm used to be. "Hey," Dorian said, leaning against the doorframe. "Tough break, huh?" Aaron looked up, startled. "You're the human," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "The one who survived the impossible injury." "That's me," Dorian replied, stepping into the room despite the ache in his abdomen. "And you're the kid who looks like he's about to quit. Bad idea." Aaron's face darkened. "I've lost my arm. I'll never work again. My family." "We'll need you more than ever," Dorian interrupted. He pulled up a chair, wincing as he sat down. "Listen, kid, life's gonna throw a lot of garbage your way. The trick is to throw it right back." Aaron frowned. "How?" "By deciding that every day you wake up is another chance to fight," Dorian said. "It's not easy, but it's worth it. You've got more strength than you think." For the first time, a flicker of hope crossed Aaron's face. Watching from the observation deck, Mulrick took note of Dorian's interactions with Aaron. The human's ability to inspire others, even while injured, was remarkable. It added a new layer to the enigma of human resilience. "He should be resting," a nurse remarked, shaking her head. Mulrick nodded. "And yet he heals faster because he refuses to rest." Fascinating. In his private notes, Mulrick began drafting a theory that the human capacity for emotional resilience and connection directly influenced their physical recovery. The infirmary was unusually quiet as Dorian lay unconscious in the regeneration chamber, his body encased in a sterile cocoon of light and sound. The molecular regenerator worked tirelessly, emitting soft pulses of energy as it attempted to rebuild his liver and repair the damage to his abdominal cavity. Around him, the medical team monitored the process, their faces tense with concentration. "He's stabilizing, but barely," Mulrick said, his eyes fixed on the fluctuating readouts. "The cellular regeneration is incomplete, and his immune system is beginning to reject the foreign compounds. We're running out of time." A nurse approached with a data tablet displaying human medical protocols retrieved from the Earth archives. The Earth files suggest corticosteroids to suppress immune response. Should we attempt synthesis? Mulrick hesitated, his mind racing through the possibilities. Corticosteroids were a logical choice, but the risk of exacerbating the healing process was significant. "Begin synthesis," he ordered finally. "And monitor cytokine activity closely. If his immune system spirals into a storm, we'll lose him." The nurses scrambled to carry out the order as Mulrick leaned over the chamber. He studied Dorian's pale, sweat-drenched face, his breathing shallow but steady. For all his bravado, the human was now at the mercy of Mulrick's medical expertise. Inside the regeneration chamber, Dorian's mind drifted in and out of consciousness. In the moments of clarity, his body burned with pain, but his spirit refused to yield. When the pain receded, his mind wandered into fragmented memories of his past. He saw himself as a young boy, sitting in the back of a pickup truck on a dirt road, watching the sun set over endless fields. His father, a rugged man with calloused hands, had always told him that life's challenges were just another chance to prove yourself. "You're tougher than you know, kid," his father had said. The memory shifted to years later. He was standing in a torrential downpour, surveying the ruins of his home after a hurricane had torn through his town. His neighbors had been devastated, but Dorian had picked up a shovel and started clearing debris. One by one, others joined him. It wasn't long before the entire community was working together to rebuild. "You don't give up," he muttered to himself in the present, his voice barely audible over the hum of the regeneration chamber, "no matter what." Alarms jolted Mulrick out of his thoughts as the chamber's diagnostic systems began flashing red. "What's happening?" he demanded, rushing to the control panel. "His immune system is entering a hyper-inflammatory state," a nurse replied, her voice tight with alarm. "Cytokine levels are spiking. He's going into shock." Mulrick cursed under his breath. "Administer the corticosteroid compound immediately. Prepare for intravenous nanogel infusion to counteract tissue swelling." The staff moved with precision, injecting the synthesized corticosteroids into Dorian's bloodstream while recalibrating the regenerator to compensate for the inflammatory response. Mulrick's hands hovered over the controls, his mind racing. If the cytokine storm continued, it would overwhelm Dorian's body, shutting down his organs one by one. Then, miraculously, the alarms began to quiet. The corticosteroids took effect, dampening the immune response. The regenerator resumed its work, repairing tissue with renewed efficiency. Mulrick exhaled slowly, his body sagging with relief. "He's stabilized," a nurse confirmed, her voice tinged with disbelief. Mulrick nodded, his gaze never leaving Dorian's face. For now. Hours later, Dorian woke to the sight of Aaron sitting by his bedside. The young Xylarian was holding a small trinket, his expression a mix of apprehension and determination. "About time you woke up," Aaron said, his voice trembling slightly. "I was starting to think you weren't as tough as you pretended to be." Dorian chuckled weakly, the sound more a rasp than a laugh. "Guess I'd be a hypocrite if I quit, huh?" Aaron's gaze dropped to the trinket in his hands. "You told me to fight. To throw the garbage life gives you right back. I've been thinking about that." And Aaron met his eyes, his voice steady. "And I'm going to fight. I don't know how yet, but I'm not giving up." Dorian smiled, though the effort made his face ache. "That's the spirit, kid." From the observation deck, Mulrick watched the exchange in silence. For all his medical training, he couldn't ignore the profound impact Dorian had on those around him. The human's resilience wasn't just a physical anomaly, it was something deeper, something that defied analysis. In the days that followed, Dorian's condition continued to improve. His liver regenerated faster than expected, aided by the regenerator and the precise balance of immune suppression. The nurses marveled at his recovery, though they often scolded him for pushing himself too hard. "You are insufferable," Mulrick said one evening as he checked Dorian's vitals. "Every step you take sets back your recovery, yet you insist on moving about like nothing is wrong." Dorian shrugged, his grin lopsided. "What can I say? Sitting around's not my style." Mulrick sighed, but there was no malice in his expression. "You confuse me, Mr. Blackwell. Your body defies our understanding, and your mind refuses to accept limitations. It's fascinating." Dorian's grin widened. "That a compliment, Doc?" "An observation," Mulrick replied, though a hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. By the end of the week, Dorian was walking more confidently, his strength returning with every passing day. His interactions with Aaron became a regular occurrence, and the young Xylarian's spirits visibly lifted under his guidance. Mulrick, meanwhile, began drafting a detailed report on the case, outlining the interplay between human physiology, alien medical technology, and the intangible force of willpower. He found himself revisiting his earlier beliefs about medicine, wondering if perhaps the mind played a greater role in healing than he had ever considered. Dorian's recovery was nothing short of a miracle, but Mulrick knew it was more than science. It was resilience in its purest form. The infirmary hummed with subdued activity as Dorian stood near the observation window, looking out at the expanse of Xylar's Prime's trade docks. The view was bustling, alive with motion cargo drones flitting between docking stations, merchants exchanging goods, and the faint shimmer of force fields protecting the station's perimeter. Dorian leaned on the window frame, his body still sore but functional. His reflection stared back at him, pale and weathered, but alive. Behind him, footsteps approached. "You've done the improbable," Mulrick said, his tone neutral but carrying an undertone of respect. Dorian turned, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Guess that makes us even, Doc. You kept me in one piece." Mulrick folded his elongated arms, studying the human with his sharp, analytical gaze. "You are a conundrum. You refuse to acknowledge pain, dismiss logical limits, and defy medical reasoning. I still do not fully understand how you are walking." "Don't overthink it," Dorian replied with a shrug that sent a dull ache through his shoulders. "Sometimes it's not about what you can do, it's about what you decide to do." Mulrick paused, his luminous eyes narrowing slightly. "Perhaps there is more truth to that than I initially believed." Nearby, Aaron approached, his prosthetic arm gleaming under the infirmary's lights. He carried a small object in his remaining hand, carefully wrapped in a soft cloth. "Dorian," Aaron said, his voice steady, though a flicker of emotion wavered beneath it. Dorian smiled and motioned for the boy to come closer. "Hey kid, what's that you've got there?" Aaron unwrapped the object, revealing a pendant made of intricately carved Xylarian crystal. The facets caught the light, casting faint rainbows on the walls. "It's a symbol of resilience," Aaron said, his voice growing firmer. "In my culture, it represents strength in the face of impossible odds. I want you to have it." Dorian took the pendant carefully, the weight of the gesture sinking in as he turned it over in his hands. "Thanks, Aaron. This means a lot." "You taught me what it means to fight," Aaron continued. "I wasn't sure I could before, but now I know I can. I'm going to keep going." Dorian placed a hand on Aaron's shoulder, the warmth of the boy's determination resonating deeply. "You're stronger than you know, Aaron. Just remember, life's about showing up and doing what you can, one day at a time." Aaron nodded, his confidence shining through as he stepped back, allowing Mulrick to take his place. Mulrick extended a hand, his expression unusually soft. "You are difficult, Mr. Blackwell, but you are also remarkable. Your survival has taught us much about your species and about resilience. You have my respect." Dorian clasped Mulrick's hand firmly. "You're not bad yourself, Doc. Maybe next time I won't give you such a hard time." Mulrick tilted his head slightly. "I would prefer there not to be a next time, but I suspect you will find a way to test my patience again." "Count on it," Dorian replied with a grin. By the time Dorian returned to the Celestial Wayfarer, the crew was waiting to greet him with cheers and laughter. Ian clapped him on the back, his large, expressive eyes glinting with relief. "I thought you were going to leave me to handle everything alone." "Not a chance," Dorian replied. "I'm too stubborn for that." The Wayfarer launched shortly after, leaving the shimmering towers of Xylaris Prime behind. As the ship slipped into the expanse of hyperspace, Dorian sat by the observation window in the common room, the Xylarian pendant resting in his hand. He thought of the people he had met, the lessons he had learned, and the impact his journey had left behind. Aaron's determination to keep fighting, Mulrick's newfound appreciation for the intangible connection between mind and body, and the ripple effect of resilience that touched everyone around him. Pain, he realized, was temporary, but the strength to endure to keep moving forward was what truly mattered. He closed his hand around the pendant, a quiet resolve settling over him. The stars stretched endlessly ahead, and for Dorian Blackwell, the journey was far from over.